Hey, this video is for you if you need God to do something big. I mean, like really big. This is how to plant a miracle. And before I get started, I just want to say a couple of things. Number one, I'm not one of these vending machine God kind of guys, or I think you pop in a prayer and out pops a miracle. That's just not who I am. If that's you, that's fine, but that's not who I am. And the second thing I want to say is I don't want to be flippant here because I understand that you may be in a really desperate place in your life and you just desperately need God to show up. And I just pray right up front that God will show up in an amazing way for you. But this is how to plant a miracle, and this is not something just instant that happens right away, but this is something that happens over time. And what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to tell you the story behind this little jar of money. Hopefully you can see this okay. And I'm going to start by reading a little passage from 2 Kings chapter 4. And I'm reading from the old version of the NIV back in the 80s, I think, but it's the Bible I have sitting in front of me, so that's what I'm going to read. The wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord. Now his creditor is coming to take my two boys as his slaves." So in other words, man of God, he died. His widow has two little boys and no money. They owe money. And back in the day, if you owed money and couldn't pay it, they could take your kids and haul them off to slavery, and there was nothing you could do about it. So here was somebody who needed a miracle. I just want you to notice how God shows up, and then I'm going to tell you a story from my own life. Elisha replied to her, "How can I help you? Tell me, what do you have in your house?" Notice what he asks. He asks, "What do you have?" This is very important. And she says, "Your servant has nothing there at all." Okay, so she's focused on her lack, what she doesn't have, but then she adds, "except a little oil." Elisha said, "Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside and shut the door behind you and your sons. Pour oil into all the jars, and as each is filled, put it to one side." She left him and afterwards shut the door behind her and her two sons. They brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another one." But he replied, "There's not a jar left." Then the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, and he said, "Go, sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what is left." The thing that I want you to notice about that story is how God operates. The first thing that the man of God said is he said, "What do you have?" And God operates like this. We see our lack, but God looks at the seed that we can plant. It's just like the feeding of the 5,000. He said, "What do you have?" Jesus said, "What do you have?" We have a couple of fish and a couple of loaves of bread. And, how is that going to be anything among 5,000 people or 5,000 men plus women and children? And Jesus said, "It's okay. You have something. We're going to start with what you have." And so, anyway, on to my story. When I was very young, 2, 3 years old, I went to live on a farm in the country with my grandfather's farm. He had bought it in the 1930s, and by the time I got there in the 60s, it was just a paradise. And long family story. We had to move away from there and moved out of state. But it seems like all my life, I had been trying to move back to the farm because I loved that experience of living out in the country. And I happened to marry somebody who shared my desire to live out in the country. And so we wanted to live out in the country, but unfortunately, we didn't. Our work was in town, in the city, and we didn't see a way to get out into the country. And so we were praying about it, and we felt like the Lord said to us, "What do you have?" You have to understand that at the time we were desperately poor. I mean, desperately poor. If you looked at the numbers, you would say, Dwight, there's no possible way you could have made it. There were several years in there in which our total income for the year was less than the sum of our mortgage payments. And I don't know how we did it. Like every month was a miracle. Every month that we survived was a miracle. And anyway, we were praying about this, and I just felt like God said to me, "What do you have? Let's start with what you have." And so I took all the money that I had on me. I think it was $1.78 at the time, and I put it in this jar. And I just put "house in the country" on the jar. And every so often, when I had a little extra money, I added to it and I added to it. And it was like, there's no way that this little jar is going to result in a house in the country. But I felt like God was saying, you just let me do a miracle. And so every time I went by that jar, I was just reminded that God can do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can ask or imagine. And so I just looked to God to do the miracle. And the miracle came in the strangest way. I had written a book. It was a Bible book, and I was at a church teaching from this book that I had written. And I started getting phone calls. And I got one phone call after another, and I'm teaching this class, and I didn't want to answer the phone, but finally I had to stop and answer the phone, and my son was on the phone. He says, "Dad, the police are here. They want you here as soon as possible." So I had to leave. The class was winding down anyway, so I had to leave. I went home, and when I showed up at home, I discovered that my son had been playing around with some matches and burnt down our garage. And it's like, oh my, what a mess. It's like I thought I was taking this step forward with teaching from this book I had written, and everything just came crashing down. Well, anyway, we did have insurance, and the insurance should pay for a new garage. And anyway, the contractor that put up the new garage was a friend of mine. And at the time, we were living in this old house. Everything was falling apart, and I am like the world's worst handyman. And I was just complaining to my friend Brett, and I was saying, I had this idea. I'd like to tear down this whole house and just build an apartment building right here and use the rent from the tenants of the apartment building to pay the mortgage on the property. The problem is I don't have any money to do it. And he looked at me and said, "Dwight, wait a second. You have an idea. Other people have money." And so I prayed about it, and I felt like God was saying, stop dreaming and start doing. So crazy. I mean, and just to give you an idea of how poor I was, I had no idea how to do this, where to start, but I called up an architect and I invited him out to lunch, and I was desperately afraid to the whole meal because I had no money to pay for the meal, but I just told him my idea, and he liked my idea, and he liked it so much that he paid for the lunch. And so anyway, we developed this plan, and I started by getting options to buy adjoining properties so that we could build this apartment building and get some investors and make this thing happen. Well, anyway, fast forward a few months, the city loved our idea and then hated it, and then there was 4 acres of urban blight that they wanted us to buy, and it was on the market for $1.5 million. And here I am, still poor, still not even able to afford to buy somebody lunch. We're getting all our food at a food pantry, and I felt like God said, make an offer on this property. So I a friend loaned me some money for earnest money and to pay attorney fees, and I made an offer on this $1 million property. No way, having no idea how I was going to buy it. No money at all. But anyway, over time, other people kind of got interested, and I got this group of investors that were all interested in this project. And so these investors helped me buy these 4.5 acres, and we were going to redevelop it into like this $30 million apartment complex, luxury apartments, like 120 units. And it was just this amazing thing. And then we were going to get some TIF money out of the city. Anyway, it didn't come together, and it kind of looked like the whole thing was going to crumble. And then another developer came along and says, I have a different plan. Can I buy your property? And we managed to sell that property at enough of a profit so I was able to put money in my pocket, money in the bank, and then it worked out another crazy chain of circumstances that we were able to sell our money and pocket the equity in that. And we had some money. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was some money. And I thought, okay, we can buy a little property in the country and maybe camp out there and maybe build like a little shack out in the country. And anyway, in the middle of trying to do that, and everything falling apart as we're trying to do that, I went to the bank and I says, I was forced into bankruptcy a few years ago. I'm sure I have no credit. And the mortgage lender looked at me and said, what are you talking about? You have great credit. We'll be happy to loan you money. It wasn't a lot of money because my income was so low, but it was enough money so that I could take the money that we had plus the money that that he would loan us, and we were able to build a home. And it's not build a home, but buy a home out in the country. And I'm talking to you now from that home in the country. And a year ago, my 92-year-old mother needed a place to stay. And again, another series of miracles. We were able to build a whole apartment onto our home so that she has a place to stay. So what's the point? The point is, what do you have? Lift up what you have to Jesus and watch him over time do that miracle that you need. Just keep asking him, keep talking to him, keep getting direction from him on how to get that miracle, that supernatural answer to prayer that you need in your life. God loves you dearly, and he will make the right thing happen for you. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. He satisfies your desires with good things. So anyway, hope all of this is helpful. I'm Dwight Clow. Much love from my home to yours. Have a fantastic week. And a little P.S., I have this crazy idea about how you and I could, another miracle, change our world. If you want the details, the link is in the description. Have a fantastic week.